Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shells, deaths, lacers, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome, and as promised, my second series of videos about Israel, hopefully being a moderate voice and being an eye-opener to the realities of the Israeli state. And as I pointed out, and I have to point out in every video, I am not an anti-Semite, and criticizing Israel doesn't make anyone an anti-Semite. It has to do with a political philosophy known as Zionism. Zionism is a political philosophy and ideology that dominates the state of Israel, and that is what the criticism is. And it's a criticism of the state that it has created as well. And I only criticize Israel pretty much the same way I criticize many aspects of my own government, not only its domestic policies, but its foreign policies, and it's social engineering, and every aspect of even how elected officials come to power, and the very nature of power. But anyway, I digress. I just feel a need to bring that up because a lot of Israeli critics have pointed out to me that I feel this need to defend myself right off the bat, and that somehow that makes me guilty. And I say that's actually quite true, and when you suggest that, maybe you should look in the mirror. But anyway, let's go into the new story I want to bring about the economic stranglehold that Israel has on Gaza. And I already did a video about the blockade and all the items that are not allowed in or out of Gaza, putting an economic stranglehold on the Gaza, all these Gaza industries. And I recommend that video, as I should. I'll attach it below. But let's look at another way they have an economic stranglehold, and that's by using banks. And as of April 2014, because of the negotiations breaking down yet again with the creation of the Fatah-Hamas unity government, and that's what this is all about. And let's remember that. That's what all this is about. That's what the current strikes on Gaza are. Is the Fatah-Hamas unity government. So when negotiations broke down, that unity government was created. The Israeli central bank refused to service its own currency. And then, I have to remind you, this is unheard of in the international community. And Palestinian banks were no longer allowed to send their surplus Israeli currency to the bank. And Gaza, like the West Bank and Jerusalem and all the other so-called Palestinian territories, are required to use the Israeli currency, the shekel. And this has a lot of effects. And we're going to take a quick peek at the Gaza economy to see what that does. For one thing, it disrupts the flow of electricity, petroleum, gas, as well as damages banks when you restrict these currency flows and these transfers between these banks. I also want to point out it's interesting that if central banks can declare they have to be independent of politics around the globe, like, for example, the Federal Reserve, sorry for my production values, including the Federal Reserve, they declare that they have political independence. Well, here we see obviously the Israeli central bank doesn't have political independence, but far from it. It's actively involved in economic warfare. And let me remind you that Mr. Fisher, who used to head the Israeli central bank, is now second in command at the Federal Reserve for the United States. And I'm sure the Federal Reserve continues to be equally independent. So anyway, the Palestinian economy is $6 billion, and $6 billion. And they pay 80 million shekels a month for electricity to Israel. They pay 600 million shekels a month for petroleum from Israel, and they pay 25 million shekels a month for health care from Israel. So that's pretty interesting that even though they're enslaved and they're in an open-air prison, the Gaza is providing a huge amount of revenue for the Israeli state, while the Israeli state economically sucks Gaza dry. So an interesting relationship, like parasite and host. And prior to Oslo, agreements, 120,000 Palestinians worked in Israel, and that's been whittled down quite a bit. Now it's 47,000 Palestinians who are legally able to enter and work in Israel, and they estimate something like 15,000 work there illegally. And you have to get permits through the military, no surprise there. And but all the Israeli currency goes back into Palestine and then back into Israel. And another interesting relationship to show the economic dependence on their colonial masters, the Palestinians import 85% of their goods and services from Israel, and they sell 80% of their imports to Israel. So once again, what an interesting relationship. If you put this in combination with my video about the blockade items and the things that aren't allowed in Gaza, it's a staggeringly mind-boggling, incongruent economic relationship as any that could be created. And because of this relationship and this clampdown by the Israeli banks on Palestine, of course, they've discussed creating their own currency, or actually even using the dollar. And part of the occupation is rules, regulations, and restrictions as well. And that's, I think, the overall theme here of this video. This is economic occupation as well. This is a colonial relationship, and that's another thing that's important to get out of this economic examination, is that occupation and this colonialism is at the very core of this relationship. So to characterize it as these terrorist relationship to this Jewish state is a mischaracterization. It's a colonial situation. Settlers came, conquered the native population, occupied the land, displaced them. It is a classic colonial scenario, and certainly an examination of this economic situation bears that out. And to get back from a long tangent, this no longer serving the Palestinian currency by the Israeli currency from Palestine, the Israeli central bank, it disrupts payment of services and suppliers, and that's why I mentioned earlier that it disrupts flow of electricity, petroleum, and gas. You can have damages on banks, and obviously on a day-to-day basis in Gaza, you would find a lot of problems just conducting daily business. And Palestinian businesses weren't able to make electronic transfers either, so banks would have to arrange everything in cash, which of course dealing with cash when you live in an occupation zone is near impossible. So this is economic warfare on the highest level, and another part of the occupation, and another part of Israeli neo-colonialism. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too. I want to talk to my set director.